We've all been there. You're standing in the self-help aisle, physical or digital, take your pick, surrounded by impossibly radiant people promising to transform your life in 30 days. They have perfect posture. They wake up at 4:47 a.m. They've cracked the code on anxiety, relationships, money, and apparently also sourdough bread. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small, tired voice whispers, "This isn't real." You're right, it isn't. The Flawed Guide to Genuine Growth is something different. This series we're about to begin is built on a radical premise that honest, uncomfortable self-examination, not performance, not optimization, not toxic positivity, is the only real starting point for a life that feels true. I'm not here because I figured everything out. I'm here because I haven't. And I've made enough mistakes. I sat with enough confusion. I read enough psychology to know that that's precisely what qualifies me to have this conversation with you. Across 5 episodes, this series will walk you through the hardest, most rewarding territory a human being can explore: your own interior. Why do you self-sabotage? Why does the gap between who you want to be and who you are feel so crushing sometimes? Why does just think positive make you want to throw your phone across the room? And what does genuine growth actually look like? Not as a destination, but as a practice. My friends, this isn't life coaching as you know it. There's no 5-step formula. No morning routine that will save your soul. No affirmations that pretend your problems don't exist. What there is honesty, psychology grounded in research, real frameworks built for real people navigating real, complicated lives. This series is for anyone who is tired of being sold a version of themselves they don't recognize. Anyone who has started 100 self-improvement journeys and quietly abandoned them all. Anyone who suspects that the version of growth they've been chasing was never actually theirs to begin with. You don't need to be fixed. You need to be understood, starting with by yourself. And let me tell you now about the episodes of this series. We're going to start with our first episode, You Are Not a Project. Before we can talk about genuine growth, we have to talk about the framework most of us are unconsciously operating inside. The idea that we are broken things in need of repair. This episode will examine where that idea comes from, why it's psychologically damaging, and what we're replacing it with. We'll explore the difference between change and self-rejection, between aspiration and shame-driven optimization. This is the foundation everything else is built on. The second episode, The Comfortable Prison, we're going to talk about self-sabotage, why we choose familiar pain over uncertain freedom. Self-sabotage isn't stupidity. It isn't weakness. It's a deeply rational response to deeply irrational conditions. And once you understand the architecture of why we do it, you stop being at war with yourself and start being curious instead. In this episode, we'll explore the neuroscience of habit, the emotional function of avoidance, and the strange comfort of staying exactly where you are, even when where you are is making you miserable. In our third episode, The Noise Between Your Ears, we're going to focus on understanding the inner critic without becoming its therapist. Now, most conversations about the inner critic go one of 2 directions. Either silence it completely, which is both impossible and counterproductive, or validate everything it says, which is exhausting and often inaccurate. In this episode, we will propose a third path, a genuine, psychologically grounded relationship with your own self-critical voice that uses it as information without letting it run your life. The fourth episode, Other People Are Not the Problem, we're going to talk about the hidden work of relationships and self-knowledge. We're not self-contained systems. We are relational beings, and almost everything we struggle with internally shows up most dramatically in how we connect or fail to connect with other people. In this episode, we'll explore attachment patterns, projection, and the stories we tell about other people's behavior, and what it looks like to take genuine responsibility in relationships without practicing the kind of self-erasure that passes for virtue. And in our final episode, The Practice of Being Human, we're going to talk about growth without a destination. Now, growth without a destination sounds like it shouldn't work. We're wired for goals, for metrics, for before and after photographs of our souls. In this final episode, we will propose something quieter and more durable. A practice. Not a state of achievement. Not a fixed arrival point. A daily, honest, compassionate engagement with the person you are, on the way to the person you're becoming. We will close this series the way it opened, with honesty, with imperfection, and with genuine respect for how hard this actually is. Well, my friends, this is in brief about our series, The Flawed Guide to Genuine Growth. And we're going to start today with our first episode, You Are Not a Project. That's coming next. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. What if the most damaging thing the self-help industry ever taught you wasn't a bad piece of advice, but an entire way of thinking about yourself? Now let's sit with that for a moment before we go anywhere. Because here you are. You've picked up this series with some version of the same hope that lives inside every self-help purchase, every downloaded meditation app, every dog-eared copy of every book promising to be the last book you'll ever need. The hope is, maybe this time something will finally stick. Maybe this is the thing that gets me there. Now, I'm not going to tell you that hope is wrong, but I'm going to ask you where there is, and whether there is a real place or a horizon line that keeps receding the closer you get to it. My name is Danny, and I want to be clear about something from the start. I am not your guru. I am not the person who woke up one day, read 17 books, had a breakthrough in a silent meditation retreat in the mountains, and emerged transformed. Well, that's a good story. It's just not mine. My story is messier. More false starts, more embarrassing contradictions, more moments of saying one thing and doing another, more being the person who teaches emotional regulation while absolutely losing it in traffic, more knowing, in theory, exactly what I should do and doing something else entirely. And here's what I've come to believe after years of studying psychology and years of being human. That messy story is not the thing I need to overcome before I can be helpful to you. It is precisely why I can be helpful to you. So, this series is called The Flawed Guide to Genuine Growth, and I mean every word of that title. So let's start with the reality. You are living inside someone else's framework. Let me tell you about a framework that most of us observed so early and so completely that we don't even know it's there. It goes like this. You are, at this moment, a flawed, incomplete, somewhat broken version of what you could be. There is a better you, wiser, calmer, more disciplined, more successful, more at peace, waiting to emerge on the other side of enough self-work. Your job is to fix the current version and reach the better one. The gap between who you are and who you could be is the problem. Your discomfort in that gap is appropriate. Use it as fuel. Sound familiar? It should. This framework is so pervasive that it doesn't sound like a framework at all. It sounds like just reality. But it's not reality. It's a story. A very profitable story, it turns out. The global personal development market is worth more than $40 billion and climbing. But it is a story nonetheless. And like old stories, it contains assumptions. And some of those assumptions are quietly doing damage to the people who live inside them. The core assumption is this: The present version of you is primarily a problem to be solved. And once you start living inside that assumption, something very strange happens. Self-awareness, the most valuable thing you can develop, starts to feel like an inventory of your deficiencies. You don't get curious about yourself, you audit yourself. You don't explore who you are, you compare who you are to the person you're trying to become and feel the gap as a kind of low-grade shame. And shame, as any psychologist worth the credential will tell you, is just about the worst possible fuel for genuine change. Here's the paradox that the self-help industry has never quite figured out how to monetize. The kind of self-examination that actually leads to growth begins not with rejection of who you are, but with honest, compassionate acceptance of it. Not as a final destination, not I'm fine exactly as I am and nothing needs to change, but as a starting point. You can't accurately navigate from where you are if you're too busy being ashamed of where you are to look at it clearly. Now, let me give you an example. Think about someone you know, maybe yourself, who has been trying to change a specific behavior for years. Maybe it's procrastination or overeating or the way they react in arguments or the pattern of starting things and never finishing them. And think about how they typically frame that struggle. Probably something like, I know I do this. I hate that I do this. I should have stopped doing this years ago. What's wrong with me? And notice the energy of that framing. It's contempt. It's contempt directed inward. And every time the behavior shows up again, the contempt deepens. The person doesn't just do the thing, they become the person who keeps failing to stop doing the thing. The behavior becomes identity. And identity is very, very hard to change. This is what happens when you make yourself a project. Projects are defined by the gap between their current state and their desired end state. When you are the project, you are, by definition, always insufficient, always in progress, always not quite there yet. I want to offer you something different. Not a new project, a new relationship with yourself, with your own complexity, with the genuinely hard work of being a person. Now, before we dismantle something, it's worth understanding why it works on us. Because the fix yourself narrative doesn't persist because people are gullible. It persists because it taps into something real. There's a concept in psychology called self-discrepancy theory, developed by the psychologist E. Torrey Higgins in the late 1980s. The basic idea is that we carry around multiple representations of ourselves. The actual self, who we believe we are, the ideal self, who we want to be, and the ought self, who we believe we should be. The gaps between these create specific emotional states. The gap between actual and ideal tends to generate feelings like dejection, disappointment, sadness. The gap between actual and ought tends to generate anxiety, guilt, and shame. Now, most of us are navigating both gaps simultaneously, most of the time. And here's the thing. Those gaps are real. The emotional pain they produce is real. The desire to close them is not a neurosis. It's a sign that you have values, that you care about becoming something, that you haven't given up on the possibility of a different life. The self-help industry didn't create that desire. It found it, named it, and built a product around it. And in doing so, it made a very understandable but very consequential mistake. It treated the emotional discomfort of the gap as the problem, rather than as useful information. A discomfort, in psychological terms, is almost never the problem. It's almost always a signal. The question is what it's signaling. Now, sometimes it's signaling genuine misalignment. You are living in a way that contradicts your values, and your nervous system is trying to tell you that. Sometimes it's signaling fear of change, which is different. Sometimes it's signaling the specific uncomfortable awareness that you're about to have to do something hard. And sometimes, this one is important, it's signaling that the version of yourself you're trying to become isn't actually what you want. It's what you've been told you should want. Learning to distinguish between these signals is some of the most valuable work a person can do. But you can't do it while you're treating the discomfort itself as enemy territory. There's also a neurological dimension to this. The brain has a fundamental interest in stability. Change, even change you consciously want, is experienced at a neurological level as a form of threat. The prefrontal cortex, which handles long-term planning and abstract reasoning, wants to change. The limbic system, which handles survival and emotional regulation, is deeply skeptical about it. This isn't a failure of will, it's architecture. When you approach your own development through the lens of a problem that needs fixing, you tend to engage your threat detection systems in a way that makes genuine behavioral change harder, not easier. The brain doesn't reorganize under duress. It reorganizes under safety. The specific kind of safety that comes from feeling curious about something rather than threatened by it. And here we come to the unlearning part. What we need to abandon. Let me be direct about a few things. Let me start with the first thing, with the first expression that we need to abandon. Just love yourself. I'm not asking you to love yourself. Love is a feeling, and feelings can't be willed into existence. What I'm asking for is something much more achievable. Curiosity. Honest, non-judgmental curiosity about why you are the way you are, what those patterns are doing for you, and what it would actually take to shift them. And now for the second one. Progress is linear. Well, it isn't. Anyone who has actually changed something significant about themselves, of course I'm talking about someone who truly changed it, not just performed changing it. Now, anyone who did this will tell you that the process looked less like a steady climb and more like a drunk man navigating a hedge maze. You go forward, you double back, you think you've arrived and then realize you're somewhere you've been before. This is not failure. This is how change works. And now let me attack another phrase. Your past doesn't define you. Now, I understand what people mean when they say this. They mean you are not trapped by your history, you are capable of something different. And that's true. But the dismissal of the past that often goes with this framing is a problem. Your past doesn't define you, but it absolutely shapes you. The experiences you had, the patterns you learned, the stories you were told about who you are, these are the material you're working with. Pretending they don't matter doesn't make you free. It makes you naive about your own psychology. And now for the last one. You just need more discipline. Possibly the most persistent myth in the entire genre. Discipline is downstream of clarity, not upstream of it. You don't create discipline and then figure out what you want to use it for. You get genuinely clear on what you want, why you want it, and what's genuinely in the way. And discipline often follows. Not as a character virtue you summoned through will, but as a natural consequence of that clarity. Now, the common thread in all these is that they offer the appearance of a solution while skipping the actual hard work, which is understanding what's really going on. So let's move now to the framework, what we're doing here instead. If you're not a project, what are you? And what exactly are we doing here? Now let me propose something. You are not a broken thing in need of fixing. You are a complicated person in need of understanding. Those two things feel similar from the outside, but they produce entirely different internal experiences and entirely different results. The first framework, broken in need of fixing, puts you in a permanent adversarial relationship with yourself. Every flaw is evidence of insufficiency. Every setback confirms the depth of the problem. Progress is measured by the distance between you and your inadequacies. The second framework, complicated in need of understanding, puts you in a collaborative relationship with yourself. Flaws are interesting. They have histories. They have functions. They're telling you something worth listening to. Setbacks are data. Progress is measured by the clarity and depth of your own self-knowledge and by your increasing ability to act in alignment with what you actually value. Now, here's what this looks like in practice. Instead of, I'm terrible with money, try, I have a specific relationship with money that has a history and a logic, and I'm curious about what that logic is. Instead of, I can't stop procrastinating, try something else. Procrastination is doing something for me, probably something to do with fear of perfectionism. And I want to understand that more clearly. Instead of, I'm always the one who gets hurt in relationships, try, I have a particular relational pattern that I've been living inside, and I want to see it clearly enough to make genuine choices about it. Notice what happens in each of those shifts. You don't minimize the problem. You don't pretend everything is fine, but you move from a position of self-indictment to a position of genuine inquiry. And genuine inquiry is the only starting point of genuine change. This series is structured around that inquiry. Each episode takes a specific area of struggle, self-sabotage, the inner critic, relationships, sustaining growth, and works through it in this same spirit. We name the reality without sugarcoating it. We explore the psychological honesty. We dismantle the advice that sounds helpful but isn't. We build something practical. And we stay honest about the fact that the practice of living this is ongoing. That there's no graduation, no arrival, no day when you're finally done. And one more thing, and I want to say this carefully, growth without self-compassion is just another form of self-punishment with better branding. That doesn't mean growth is comfortable. Some of what this series asks of you will be genuinely uncomfortable. Honestly, looking at yourself often is. But there's a difference between the productive discomfort of honest self-examination and the corrosive discomfort of chronic self-contempt. We were after the first kind. The second kind you've probably already had enough of. Okay, by the end of this episode, I want to leave you with something to do. Now, here's your homework. And I use that word loosely because I hate homework about as much as the next person. Now, for the next week, I want you to pay attention for how you talk to yourself about yourself. Not your explicit affirmations or your journal entries, but the running commentary. The thing you say when you make a mistake. The way you interpret your own motives. The story you tell about why you are the way you are. You're not trying to change it yet. You're just listening to it. The way you'd listen to an interesting stranger on a long train ride with genuine curiosity, without judgment, noticing the details. Most people find, when they do this, that the inner monologue is significantly harsher than they'd realized. And that's important information. Not because it means you should feel bad about your inner monologue. That would be somewhat absurd. But because you can't redirect something you haven't honestly heard. You are not a project. You are not a problem. You are a human being who is trying to live well in a complicated world with a complicated history and a complicated interior. That's not a liability. That's just the truth. And the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is always a better starting place than the fiction of a perfect self waiting to be uncovered. Now, let me leave you with some discussion questions that you can think about, maybe talk to your friends and family about. And here's my first question. When you think about improving yourself, what image comes to mind? Is there a specific version of yourself you're trying to become? Where did that image come from? Is it genuinely yours, or did you observe it from somewhere else? The second question, I want you to think about a pattern you've been trying to change for a long time without success. What would it look like to approach that pattern with curiosity rather than frustration? What questions would you ask? And my third question, have you ever experienced the difference between change that came from genuine desire versus change that was driven primarily by shame or self-judgment? What did each one feel like? The next question, in this episode, we talked about self-discrepancy, which is the gap between who you are and who you want to be. What emotion does that gap produce for you most often? Is it motivation, anxiety, sadness, or maybe something else? And my final question, if you stopped treating yourself as a project to be fixed, what would that free you up to do or feel? Well, think about these questions, discuss them with your friends, with your family, and next time we'll be talking about the comfortable prison. That's going to be episode 2. You don't want to miss it. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I'll see you again next time.